Good evening, everybody. Good evening and welcome to Real Lives. My name's Andrew. I'm going to be leading us through this evening. It's great that you're here. Let me just read you what you've already read on the invitation here. It says, Real Lives is an opportunity to hear real stories from lives that have been changed by Jesus. And that's what we've been doing this week, and that's what we're going to do this evening as well. And I'm going to introduce to you Professor John Bryant, who's Professor of Biosciences at Exeter University. Our title this evening is Bioethics and the Bible. Wow. So please give a welcome to John Bryant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take a seat.
Thank you very much.
It's great that you're here, John. Thank you.
Disappearing into the chair now, yes.
First of all, I didn't introduce you correctly because I said professor, and you're actually emeritus professor?
Emeritus professor, yes.
Help me. What does emeritus professor mean?
Okay, it does not mean completely without merit, so I need to say that straight away. Emeritus means that you have earned a position, and senior staff in universities, rather like senior naval officers, can't really drop their title unless they've been very naughty boys or girls. And so when you retire, Senate confers upon you the term emeritus, and so the poor University of Exeter can't get rid of me now.
So you're there forever?
Yeah, I'm on their books forever, even though I don't have an office there anymore.
Okay,
yeah.
Right, wow. And just tell us, just to get us into things, just give us a brief sort of summary of where your career has gone since leaving school. So what happened after leaving school and from then onwards?
Okay, so I was very fortunate in getting a place at Cambridge, at Queen's College, and loved my science so much that I wanted to take it further and qualified to do so, and then did a PhD in Cambridge. And then wanted to learn more about research. Did I want to carry on in academic research? Did I want to take it into industry and so on? So I did a 2-year research fellowship at the University of East Anglia, which was then kind of gleaming and white. You know, the concrete was so bright. You had shades on when you walked around the campus. Yeah. And then a lectureship at Nottingham. I would say, for the sake of Nottingham graduates here, that Nottingham then wasn't the Nottingham it is now. It was rather boring university, where I felt that intellectual endeavour was not exactly encouraged. It was all right, and so I applied for a job at Cardiff University to set up a new unit, and was fortunate enough to be appointed. So I set up a new unit there, and so rose up through the ranks of lecturer, senior lecturer, and reader. And reader is a title conferred mainly for your research ability, and then was tempted away by being offered a professorship in Exeter, again with a big setting up grant. So I've been very fortunate to have 2 big setting up grants in a career when many people don't have one. So I think that was, that's been a fortunate side to my career. And then at Exeter, leading Biosciences out of the doldrums was what I was charged to do.
And how many years were you Professor of Biosciences?
Well, it depends.
Exeter?
I mean, I think I probably retired properly over 10 years ago. So I sort of stuck at the job for about 20 years.
Wow. And our topic this evening, and we're going to talk about other stuff as well, of course, but our topic is bioethics and the Bible. Please help us. What's bioethics? I mean, we might know what bio means, and we might know what ethics means.
Yeah, so
what's bioethics?
You plug them together, basically. Yeah. I mean, in the sorts of work that I did, my favorite molecule is DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, the molecule without which none of us would be here, the stuff of which our genes are made. But it became apparent very early in my career that we were beginning to develop the capacity to do things with it, to therefore do things to the inheritance patterns, the genes of all sorts of organisms. And that raises ethical questions, should we? And then when you start to spread out what you can do with medicine and biology, it raises many, many other issues that relate to how we deal with people, how we deal with animals, what about our attitude to God's creation and the environment. So these are the issues of bioethics, the ethical issues that arise from biological and medical and to some extent environmental science,
right, wow.
Bioethics.
And presumably that's a very long list of issues.
No, it is pretty long.
Can you just give us an extract from that list? Give some of the things that we won't go into detail yet about anything, but just give us a taster.
Okay, so, I mean, in the next book that's coming out, I think we've got 15 chapters, but they vary from things like what we can now do with human embryos, not just in IVF, but in terms of selecting embryos with particular genes, to editing human genes, editing animal genes, stem cells, cloning, transhumanism, interfacing humans with IT devices, what we call synthetic biology, building bacteria to do particular stuff. All those are bioethical issues.
And those are all things that you've had to try and get your head around?
Yeah, because we teach bioethics at Exeter.
Wow.
I think once you've got your head around DNA, the rest kind of falls into place to some extent.
I'll bear it in mind. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. Can I wind back a bit
Yeah, sure.
to your childhood?
Yes, yes.
Do you have a happy childhood?
A very happy childhood.
And where was that?
That was in Croydon, on the southeastern edge of London. It was in Surrey in those days, but it's now a London borough. And indeed, we were right out on the southeastern edge of Croydon on a council estate that was built specifically straight after the war. So I think we must have moved there when I was a very small child, and we lived in a prefab until my mid-teens. And the council estate was very, very fortuitously located because it was located right on the edge of London's green belt. Right. The council estate was built on a golf course that had been abandoned during the Second World War, and that had been incorporated into London's green belt. The council had taken over some of it for football and cricket pitches, but some of it was just woods, and the golf links had turned into meadows, and then it then went into wild woodland and then farmland. So basically, we were growing up, my brother and I, on the edge of countryside. And obviously, we didn't have much money as a family, but we could walk, and we walked in the countryside. And I just developed a passion for the natural world, very much encouraged by a primary school teacher who recognized that I and a number of other boys and girls in the class had this deep passion, and she really encouraged us. Nobody forgets a good teacher. I've never forgotten her.
Right.
I later learned she was a Christian, incidentally.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that passion turned into a real desire to learn to do biology, basically.
I was going to ask you, when that happened, that real desire to do biology, what sort of age are we talking about that you thought science is exciting and I want to do this?
Well, I knew biology was exciting, and this was the days before universal ownership of televisions, but in our primary school we used to have the nature programs on the radio. And so although I had, amongst the people I would name as my heroes, were certainly England cricketers, but there were also nature commentators like Peter Scott and James Fisher. And I thought that was a great life, that they could go out bird watching and they could talk about it on the radio. So although I had no concept of what being a biologist was, there was that idea that, you could actually do it. And then I think it must have been when I was about 12 or 13, I suddenly twigged, actually, that people were paid for being scientists. And that included biology, So
yeah.
I thought, okay, that's what we'll do. But I wondered about whether to put it into medicine for a while. Should I channel my biology into medicine and havered about a bit? But in the end, being offered a place at Cambridge in natural sciences kind of removed that.
But already in early teens, you were thinking, I'd like to give my life to
biology.
Yeah.
Yes, I think very much so. Having not really a clue what that would mean, No. When you live on a council estate, you don't meet very many professional people. Eventually, at grammar school, you meet the parents of your friends and colleagues who are much more middle-class background, and you can see the sorts of jobs that they might be doing.
And what else at home as a boy? The running, is that right?
Yeah, I did a bit of running. But
A bit of running. Tell us about your bit of running.
I have quite a talent for long-distance running, but I was quite good at school, but I think being a relatively late developer in terms of raw talent, that really came through as a student, and I ended up having a county vest for 2 or 3 counties. So, yeah.
Wow.
so I'm all right.
Yeah. And when
But I
you
also play cricket.
yeah, and talking about your childhood, then did God and faith play any part in that?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, although technically we were a working class home, it was actually a working class Christian home. And my dad, for technically a working class man in the 1950s, had extraordinarily radical ideas about the equality of the genders and sharing of housework and so on. Although he worked long shifts as a postman, he would join in with the domestic chores wherever possible, and also relating to the kids. It was really quite almost a radical viewpoint he took. So my parents were sincere Christians. Dad did his work like that George Herbert poem, doing it for the Lord, sweeping a room, being a postie, doing it for the Lord. And so you that faith rubs off on you. But because I went on further in education than either of them had done, you're bound to have questions that they can't help you with. And so you do go through times of questioning, you do times of reevaluating why you believe this. I had a particularly intense spiritual experience when I was about 11 or 12, which I don't want to say anything more about, but I thought, oh wow, there's something there, and I think over the years, you've continually got to look back to see, what is the basis for my faith? It's not a kind of given all the time, and sometimes that's miraculous interventions, but sometimes it's a cool scientific look at evidence. And so my faith and my science have grown like that. I will not have it that I have two bits of my brain, that they are completely interdigitated, and I think genuinely they fed off each other.
And there was never a time, for instance, when you were still at home before university, that you kind of thought, hey, I'm not sure how this fits together. Can I really be a Christian, a believer in Jesus and a believer in God, and be a scientist?
That's never crossed my mind, interestingly. Okay. And I think it was helpful that one of my teachers at grammar school, one of the biology teachers at grammar school, was a sincere Christian. He was a high church Anglican, in fact, but his faith was very real, and he taught me about evolution, which I understood, and so on. So I've never seen the two areas of search for truth or knowledge as being in conflict with each other. Some people see them as both okay, but kind of going along parallel streams. But say for me, that it's got to be integrated. I can't live with a split brain existence. So they have to be integrated. Yeah. And so I think from time to time, what you find out in science makes you pause and think, and we might want to explore that later. And you think, well, how does that tally with what the Bible tells me? How does that tally with what I've been taught? And you have to sit down and be really honest and say, okay, well, we have to work out if my experience that these two methods of searching for truth are equally valid, then they will be compatible with each other. So we need to work out how that should be. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about that as far as these bioethics issues is concerned. Yes. I mean, what difference does it make to you, thinking about these bioethics issues, that you're a Christian? This is very interesting. I'll tell you a little story. That we were one of the first universities to introduce bioethics for biology students. Some universities... Meaning they had to do it? Initially it was an option, but very quickly we decided they had to do it. We were one of the first universities to introduce such courses, and shortly after we did so, it was decided at a national level that all bioscience graduates should be able to talk about ethics. That was a kind of, not exactly an edict, but guidance handed down to the university curriculum, all biology. And so it was also decided again at national level that we should enable biology academics to do that, that they need to be able to do that with their own students rather than bringing in theologians and philosophers who don't know the subject. And so a national initiative was set up to enable biology academics to learn how to do this. 3 academics were appointed who were already teaching ethics. There was me at Exeter, there was a friend, Chris Wilmot, at Leicester University, and then somebody who became a friend at Westminster University. And what the Higher Education Academy did not know was they just appointed 3 Christians to run this initiative. And I think the reason that Christians started to teach ethics to biologists was that they saw it as part of exercising their Christian wisdom and virtue in an area of science that they had direct hands-on experience, asking this much more general question: how should wider society make use of quite difficult scientific knowledge? And you know, our parents' generation had faced it at the end of the Second World War. How should wider society make use of knowledge of nuclear fission and that sort of physics? And we were now seeing that for biology, that how should wider society make use? Interestingly, test tube babies were one of the things that kind of started to alert biologists, not just medics, that there were ethical issues here.
Yeah, but what do you say if I say to you, look, you know, I don't know what your Bible's like, but there's nothing in my Bible about organ donation, cloning, gene therapy, etc., etc.
You're absolutely correct. My Bible's very similar to yours in that
I hope so, yes.
We've checked, after all. Indeed, and it says nothing about nuclear fission either, although, you know, you might get the impression that you shouldn't destroy the world. But I think what we see here, then, is that in respect to those of us who are grappling with these issues, it's a question of exercising the fruit of the Spirit and the virtues that God starts to implant and grow in our lives. And the virtues here would be the virtues, firstly, of wisdom. Is this a good idea to do this? In respect of my love of God and my love of humankind, is this a good idea?
In other words, not just can we do it, but would it be wise to do it?
Would it be wise to do it? And then we have the virtue of agape, self-giving love. Now, how does this tally with what I believe about loving my neighbor? How does it tally about what I believe about loving God and His world? And so you have these principles, and you pray that the Holy Spirit will inform you that you'll be able to apply these principles to individual situations. And what that does mean in some circumstances, maybe about half those issues we talked about just now, Christians will disagree with each other because, you know, we can't pull stuff straight out of here for direct guidance any more than our Muslim friends can pull anything out of the Holy Quran.
I get this thing about asking, you know, looking for wisdom and is it a wise decision? And then the whole thing about love, would this be really a loving thing to do? Can we try and link this to a specific issue? Can you choose a particular issue and then give us an idea of how wisdom and love, and maybe other things too, I don't know, sort of feed into that, thinking about it?
Well, I think the two where the debate has been strongest have been, firstly, in this whole area of stem cells. I need to expand a little bit here. Stem cells are these cells that might be used to repair tissue damage, repair heart muscle, not repair broken hearts, I need to say, but that won't work with stem cells. And the most versatile stem cells are found in the very early human embryo, in the stages before pregnancy is established. There's about 7 days of embryonic existence after an egg is fertilized, before a pregnancy is established. And about day 5, the embryo is at a stage when we could take those stem cells and maybe start to use them in these medical therapies. So that's the kind of proposition, and it was agreed by Parliament in 2002. So we have embryos, and we have the possibility of using them. And we have, then that tension comes up, because we love our neighbor. And so there's one school that says, okay, well, you know, the embryo is not yet a person, but nevertheless is the weakest of our neighbors, and therefore we should love it. On the other hand, you have to say, the embryo is not yet a person. Our neighbor is the one that needs a stem cell transplant, needs to have repaired heart muscle. And you can see that they're both using the love your neighbor as the means of arguing. The other one that we could talk about, again, relates to embryos, that it's quite possible, with all the DNA knowledge we now have, to use test tube technology to make an embryo where you can select. I don't want an embryo that's going to have, when it's born as a child, going to have cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs disease. So we can select embryos, and then you're saying, well, I'm discarding these because they would have a genetic disease. And again, you have to decide, are you discarding humans? Because if the embryos are people, then you can't discard them as people. Or are we saying that actually, well, these are not yet people, they could become people if there was a pregnancy, but so we're selecting the ones that can grow into people. Even that has a hint of playing God about it. But so you can see the tensions would arise in these instances, both instances, in our analysis of how we regard the early human embryo in those stages before a woman is pregnant.
And you've said that a number of these issues Christians will disagree about.
They will.
Are there issues, you may not want to say what they are, but are there issues where John Bryant says, at the moment, I really don't know?
For quite a long time, I think, and perhaps I still do, I think sit on the fence with stem cells. And it's not because, I'm going to be very clear, it's not because I believe that the early embryo is a person, because it isn't yet. It's because I worry about commodification, turning the human embryo into a commodity.
Can you explain a bit more what you mean?
So what we would do, if we were to make embryos by IVF, by test tube technology, just to make stem cells, then they become a commodity.
Okay.
And I think, once we start to devalue human life, even if we don't believe that these embryos are yet people, then we are beginning to open up the possibility of commodifying actual human beings, which of course is done in slavery and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So I think I still do slightly sit on the fence with stem cells. Some days I go this way and some days I go that. I think fortunately science has saved us actually from the decision making, because scientists have found another way of generating stem cells that work. Okay. So maybe science came to the rescue of an ethical situation.
And came to your rescue too.
Well, of many of us, I think.
Sure.
Yeah.
And can you mention a few, you've mentioned stem cells, can you mention a few other areas where, this wisdom and love thinking informs any Christian thinking about this, presumably not just Christians as well?
Well, I would say that cloning would be one. The idea that we can copy the genotype, that is the genetic makeup of another human being. It's a mistake to think we can copy another human being, because we are much, much more than our genetic makeup. Genetic makeup contributes very largely to our physical appearance. Not entirely, even that. And contributes maybe 40 to 50% of factors such as intelligence and personality, running ability and that sort of thing. But you can't take my genes and make another me because of all the other factors that go to make me. Nevertheless, there are people who think cloning will come one day in the future, and I think that really would be an instance of I'm trying to create a human in my image.
Oh, right, okay.
And I think Christians and non-Christians mostly believe that should not be done. Although I've talked to Americans who say, well, money will buy eventually. Mm-hmm. Money talks. Actually, Bob Dylan said, money doesn't talk, it swears.
But I mean, do you fear that might happen one day?
I think it might happen one day. I think, fortunately, again, science has come to our rescue, or shall we say, no. I think the way humans are made has come to our rescue. It turns out to be very, very, very hard to clone any primate. I'm not talking about archbishops here.
Good.
I'm talking about the great apes. It's proved very, very hard. And I think it might simply be that, it's going to be so difficult to reproduce another human. Mm-hmm. We can get as far as the embryo, but they won't go any further. So maybe science has rescued us from that conundrum.
John, can I move you on? I mean, I found that whole wisdom-love thing fascinating. But what about during your career, maybe your time at university and your time teaching, and especially as professor in Exeter, have you ever had colleagues or anyone else say to you, "Come on, you're a scientist. You're, acknowledged as really having brain power here, and yet you believe in God. I mean, isn't that sad? Have you had that kind of reaction from people?
I personally have not had that said to me directly, but I know there are people who would be quite happy to say it to me if I met them. I've had colleagues who have kind of hinted at it by kind of going around the mulberry bush. And in all the places I've worked, I am known as a Christian, have been known as a Christian. And I think the difficulty is not that they think that you're nutty, but they just think that's your thing. You have this kind of club you go to, you kind of God botherers,
Yeah.
And wouldn't be willing to say that that you're daft. Although I have debated in Christian Union missions with people from outside science who would take that line, outside science mainly. And I think I would say to them that one, the very fact of existence makes you stop to think about it. And I know that at that point, Richard Dawkins would say, okay, any further question isn't worth asking because it can't be answered. But, when you have somebody like the author and commentator Saul Bellow saying that existence is so odd that there might as well be a God because it's no odder. So, even at that level, you begin to think, well, existence. And then you look at the way the universe works, the way the universe is arranged, the laws of nature, which are fine-tuned to an extent that even the best engineer, and I've met a good engineer here tonight already, even the best engineer in the world could not match by many orders of magnitude. And some of the ways that the elements, for example, carbon are made, are so, as it were, coincidental, contingent upon really, really, really rare events. You begin to think, actually, what's going on here? It's hard not to stop to take notice. I think two quotations come to mind. That Einstein, who was a kind of liberal Jewish sort of believer, said that the more you investigate the universe and the way it works, the more you come to the conclusion that a mind infinitely superior to that of humankind, he probably said mankind in those days, is behind it all. Yeah, wow. And then you have Fred Hoyle, who was not known for having a faith, quite a strong atheist, but having looked at the rarity of the event that makes carbon, the very element we need for life, having looked at what I've just described, the fine-tuning, said that he said that some superior intellect has been monkeying about with the laws of nature. And even at that level, you begin to think, what's going on? Now, the Apostle Paul said, actually, when you look at nature, you see God in those early verses in Romans. We tend to put that aside at the moment, that because you can't actually see God doing the drawings, you tend to put him aside. But I think any intelligent person looking at the laws of nature and the way that physics works to produce biology means that you really have to stop and take notice. Something is going on here. Something is going on. We live in a very strange universe. Yeah. And then you say, well, does this God meet us? And I think as a Christian, you really do have to examine the person of Jesus. And again, I go back to Einstein, not a Christian believer, but he said, I was brought up as a Jew, and I love reading the Jewish law, but I also love reading the Gospels, because the person of Jesus that comes out of those pages is no myth, but shines forth as a remarkable person. And I think when you examine the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, you can conclude that he was indeed a remarkable person, and made claims about himself which, were they not true, would make him a bad man or madman. So I think we have evidence. You can't pin down the existence of Jesus by scientific methodology, but you can use the methods of archaeology, of history. You can use the methods of the law court. These are all types of evidence that we all accept in day-to-day life. So that's the sort of reply I would give if I had the chance to at great length.
So, I mean, you're clearly very, as a scientist, and the scientist you are, you're completely, there's no sense of embarrassment that you're also a Christian.
No. none at all, none at all. And I've been quite happy to state that. I mean, we can talk about evolution later if you like, but evolution's the one that always...
Well, since you've mentioned it, let's say it, because, I mean, that's one of the standard things. What about evolution? Something like that. Just talk a little bit about that issue for us.
Okay, well, biologists get very cross when they hear the words evolution is just a theory. The term theory in science does not mean a lucky guess, like when you see in the detective thrillers, I've got a theory about this, Sarge. It's not that at all. That's called a hunch. A theory is really a view that is so well established by the evidence that it is very unlikely to be falsified. And so people who say to me that evolution is just a theory, I said, well, another just a theory is gravity. Perhaps you'd like to just walk out of the top floor window. So I would say that in terms of my understanding as a scientist, evolution is very, very strongly established. And I see it, if you work with DNA, it's very hard not to see it. We can build family trees of individual genes, as we've done in different organisms, to see the variation between this plant and this plant, this animal and this animal. So you can actually see it in progress. And I think we then have to go back to thinking about what do our scriptures mean, what are they for? And it isn't a scientific text. Just as you've already told me, it's not a bioethical text, and I'm right with you there. And we have to understand different genre of literature. We also have to understand, though, that God shines forth from the pages.
Yeah. On this invitation, it says here, I read it out at the beginning, Real Lives is an opportunity to hear real stories from lives that have been changed by Jesus. How has John Bryant's life been changed by Jesus?
Well, I think firstly, I had a very strong desire to serve God in whatever I did. That was my dad's example, doing his postman's job, then later caring, when he retired, helping old people by digging their gardens for them, that sort of thing. A real example. And I wanted to serve God in my science, wherever that took me. I thought at one point it might be taking my science overseas, taking my PhD knowledge into agriculture development. I chose to work on plant genes because I believed, and it's still true, that I've said without DNA we wouldn't be here, that's true, but also without plants none of us would be here either, because they do feed the world. And so I wanted to apply my genetic understanding to plants. And that was a decision, if you like, to use it to God's service. But I got called into university teaching, and there's no other way about it. So many people, both secular and Christian, said that's where you should be. So that's where I went. And I think you do influence people. You do have an influence on people. You have an influence on situations. You have an influence on students, on PhD students, on your colleagues. And I was sharing with you just before we came in, I think I'll share it now, that I still think that however many pivotal discoveries my group has made, I still think it's what you've done with people that counts. And some years ago, I had a letter from a former student. She and her boyfriend had been a very sweet couple. They'd gone out almost through their university career, and they went off to Ireland to pursue their careers. And I had a letter from the girl saying, "Dear John, my John and I, who are now married, now understand why you were different from the others. And we have found the Lord too."
Wow.
And they were pursuing their careers in science. And so I think it is it's the way that you interact with people. I was appointed at Exeter, as the Vice-Chancellor then said, to bring an unwilling biology department into the 20th century, bring all this gene stuff, all this biochemistry. And when you're heading up a department where half of them don't want you to be there, you have to have a lot of Christian grace and wisdom. And I really do believe that was a calling to serve God through that university. And I used to arrive at my office in the days before emails were flooding in their hundreds. I used to arrive at my office having dropped the boys off at school, arrive there about 20 past 8, deal with the correspondence that had come in, and then go up and join a small group to pray in the chapel, which is just up the hill from my... And that seemed to set the day. And I think I really did see, and it was quite interesting how critical non-Christian, that's where they'd be critical, non-Christian colleagues would be. Do you think that action, John, was worthy of a Christian? Would it say a non-Christian colleague? And I would think, well, it might have been tough, but it needed doing. Or someone would say, actually, I think you're right, and that was a grave mistake. I must go and apologize for it.
So, and this next question, you may feel you've already answered it, in which case tell me you've already answered it. But I mean, what would John Bryant not have if he didn't have Jesus?
Well, it's impossible to imagine, because, it's really hard to imagine what that would be like. I don't think I can.
Okay.
I won't say that I've been the ideal servant of Jesus through my career. You make mistakes, you sometimes cut corners that shouldn't be cut, sometimes you're a bit brusque to people where you shouldn't be, and so on. And I'm sorry for those occasions, but I think the fact that I say I'm sorry for them means that there is somebody who's prodding me and saying, this is the standard, son.
Yeah. John, thank you. Just imagine that afterwards we're going to have a 10-minute break in a minute, and somebody comes up to you and says, look, I've been listening to this, and I think I probably do believe in God. I think probably God's there. But why drag Jesus into it? Why is this? What's this stuff about Jesus? Why do we need this? Why don't we just say, okay, there's a God?
And there are people like that, and I suspect there are one or two of my science colleagues who are like that they certainly wouldn't describe themselves as atheists, but don't see the Jesus thing. I would say that Jesus is a very clearly important figure in human history. Here we have a person who didn't go to university, who didn't write any books, who had a few followers, living in a tiny corner of the Roman Empire under Roman subjugation 2,000 years ago, and yet has become a core figure in the history of the world. Now, what's all that about? We have his followers who believed he was dead and gone, suddenly being transformed by an understanding that he had risen from the dead. Well, that doesn't happen mostly. So we have a figure here whose life and times make you sit up and take notice, and who himself claimed to be God's revelation for us. And so I think that is what I would say, that Jesus enables us to link to God the Creator by representing him on earth and by being present in us through a spiritual miracle. And that's worth doing. As I put it on another occasion, the creator of this extraordinary 13.8 billion year old universe asks us to call him Dad, because that's what Jesus instructed us to do. And it's because of Jesus that we can do that.
Wow. I think on that note we'll stop. Thank you so much for what you've shared with us. Thank you for coming and giving us your time. It's just amazing to hear someone with your background, with your knowledge, with your understanding, talking about Christian faith. So thank you. Let's thank John Bryant. If you stay there.
I will.
Wow, thank you. That's been amazing. Thank you very much, John, for that. What we've got now is a 10-minute break. It's a 10-minute break where you can get some more food and some drink. You may want to come up to John. He'll be around here or walking around, I don't know, and ask him a question, maybe about bioethics, maybe about his faith, whatever. Let's use the time. And after that 10 minutes, I'm going to do just a short talk about the Christian faith. When John and I met up last week in Exeter, I asked him, one of the last questions I asked him was, What's your favorite bit of the Gospels? They're Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, like the biographies of Jesus in the Bible. What's your favorite bit of the Gospels? And immediately he came out with what his favorite bit of the Gospels is. And I'm going to talk about that favorite bit of the Gospels for a few minutes as we finish. So that we'll start again. It's now 1:15. We'll start again at 25 past. So let's use the 10 minutes. Talk to John, get food and drink. And we're going to hear music again from Tom and Leela. Enjoy.
It's strange on the wrong side of town. It's great, but why can't anybody smile a little? Everybody frowns, excuse the lack of sleep. See, I've been driving back and forth a lot when nobody's around, 'cause it's strange on the wrong side of town. Guess I'll be leaving now. Turn around, no faking now. Something really knocked you down after 20 feet. Slow it down, get your feet back on the ground. But coming back is never easy when you don't know where you've been. It's great in this familiar town. It's strange, 'cause it's like nothing ever changed, but something has, I don't know how, it's a point of view. Guess the grass is always greener when you're wanting something new. But it's great in this familiar town, at least for now. Turn around, don't fake it now. Something really knocked you down after 20 feet. Slow it down, get your feet back on the ground. But coming back is never easy when you don't know where you've been. Turn around, don't fake it now. Something really knocked you down after 20 feet. Slow it down, get your feet back on the ground. But coming back is never easy, so turn around, don't fake it now. Something really knocked you down after 23. Slow it down, get your feet back on the ground. But coming back is never easy when you don't know where you've been. There is no greater love than that which God has shown by sending his own Son, who chose to leave his throne. He went up to the cross, he died for you and me, that we would be with him and share in eternity. God is this? How glorious is He who reigns in heaven forever. What perfect love, what sacrifice. Jesus gave Himself for me. Yes, Jesus gave Himself for me. There is no other path that leads us to our home, that brings us to our King, to stand before His throne. And one day we'll arrive, and there will be no doubt that Jesus Christ is Lord. Every knee will bow. What God is this? How glorious is He who reigns in heaven forever. What perfect love, what sacrifice. Jesus gave Himself for me. Yes, Jesus gave Himself for me. Death, where is your sting? Swallowed up in victory. The grave could not contain our God. Jesus Christ, the risen one. Death, where is your sting? Swallowed up in victory. The grave could not contain our God. Jesus Christ, the risen one. What God is this? How glorious is He who reigns in heaven forever. What perfect love, what sacrifice. Jesus gave Himself for me. What God is this? How glorious is He who reigns in heaven forever. What perfect love, what sacrifice. Jesus gave Himself for me. Yes, Jesus gave Himself for me. What God is this? How glorious is He, who reigns in it forever. What perfect love, what sacrifice. Jesus gave Himself for me. Yes, Jesus gave Himself for me.
Wow, it's all gone quiet. People are expecting me to start, so I'm going to start. That's been great. I don't know how you feel about it, but it's been great for me to hear John talk about his life and talk about his areas of knowledge, I think what struck me was very much this thing that he doesn't see his faith and his academic knowledge as two separate things. It's all one thing. And I think that's great. Now what we're going to do, what we do every evening after this 10-minute break, we do just a short talk about really the central focus of Christianity. And as I said to you, I asked John last week what was his favorite bit in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And he immediately told me what it was. So I'm going to talk about that just for a few minutes now. And the bit that's John's favorite bit in the Gospels is the beginning of John's Gospel, the fourth Gospel, and it's the beginning of that Gospel, and I'm just going to say a few things about that. The reason I'm talking about this is because it's about Jesus. The Gospels are about Jesus. They're like biographies of Jesus. And you remember the last question I asked John was, what would you say to someone who says, well, I believe in God, but I don't get this Jesus stuff? And the answer came very clearly that John sees Jesus as incredibly important. So I want to just say three things about Jesus from this Bible passage at the beginning of John's Gospel. The first thing is, Jesus reveals God to us. He reveals God to us. Let me read you the very beginning. If you've ever been to a carol service, you've heard this read out. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. In the beginning was the Word. Now we know that's talking about Jesus because a little bit later on we read the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. That's talking about Christmas. And later on in the Gospel of John, not that John, but the John who wrote this Gospel, we discover that this is all about Jesus. And right at the beginning of his book, this man, John, says, in the beginning was the Word, Jesus. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. In other words, he's claiming that Jesus is God come into our world, that Jesus became a human being to reveal God to us. So the first thing I want to say about Jesus is he reveals God to us. And I want to say, I think that's very logical. If there is a God, and I'm sure there is, and if he wanted to reveal himself to us, and I'm sure he did, I think it's very logical that he should become a human being and come into our world. Let me give you an example to make that clear. Imagine there are 3 insects on my hand, and they're discussing whether Andrew exists. I'm Andrew. It's a big topic among insects. This is not very scientific. And one of the insects says, well, I think Andrew probably does exist. And another says, no, I think this is just for a faith for weak insects who can't cope with the reality of life. And the third one says, well, I don't know whether Andrew exists. I'm an agnostic insect. A few people got that joke. Thank you very much. Now, imagine, they can't see me. I'm so big. They're so small. Imagine that I love them. This is going to get harder and harder to imagine. Imagine that I want to reveal myself to them. And imagine that I can do anything I want. I have power to do anything I want. How could I reveal myself to them? Well, there are a number of possibilities. Hello? Now we have 3 deaf insects. Or another possibility would be, now they've experienced that there is a power outside themselves, but a relationship is really no longer possible. No, if I love these insects, and especially if I know that they will discover real life as insects if they get to know me, and I want to reveal myself to them, the best way of revealing myself is to become an insect and live among them. And after a time, they'd realize one of the insects is a bit different, and then they'd ask me who I am, and I could say, yeah, I'm Andrew, I'm from Southampton. Now, that example doesn't prove anything at all, but I think it shows that if God exists, and I'm sure he does, and if he wanted to reveal himself to us, and I'm sure he did, it is very logical that he should come into our into our world as a human being. And that is what the Christian faith says. Jesus is God revealing God to us. That's the first thing about Jesus. He reveals God to us. If you want to know what God is like, look at Jesus. Second thing about Jesus is Jesus came to rescue us. Let me read you something here, because this beginning of John's Gospel here, and in fact the whole Bible, says that we all need rescuing. Listen to this. It talks about Jesus as the light, and then it says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. Now, I think everybody agrees that there is darkness in our world. There is bad stuff in our world. You might be thinking of wars, or you might be thinking of, I don't know, sexual abuse. You might be sort of thinking of all sorts of things. But there is darkness in the world. And I think we would all accept, too, that I can't just point at other people and say there's darkness there, there's darkness there. I also have to point at myself, because there's darkness in me, too. All of us have done bad stuff. All of us have sometimes behaved and lived as if God didn't exist. We have darkness inside us. All of us, me included, sometimes we've done stuff that we're really ashamed of now. And we hope that nobody else knows that it's happened. Now, Jesus came to sort out the darkness. And the center of the Christian faith is that when Jesus came, he came first and foremost to show us what God is like. But then he came to die on the cross. And the Christian faith says that when Jesus died on the cross, Jesus took all the darkness onto himself. He took my bad stuff and your bad stuff. He took all our bad stuff onto himself. And he took the punishment that we deserve. I mean, that is what Jesus said. Jesus said he'd come to give his life as a ransom for many. And we know what a ransom is. A ransom is a price you pay to set people free, isn't it? Well, Jesus was saying, when I die on the cross, I'm giving my life as a ransom. I'm paying the price to set people free. And so the Christian faith says when Jesus died on the cross, he was taking the blame for our bad stuff. He was taking the blame for what the Bible calls sin. And sin is basically just turning our backs on God and living as if he's not there. And all of us have sometimes done that. So Jesus goes to the cross, and almost the last thing that Jesus said when he was dying on the cross, almost the last thing he said before he died was this: "It is finished." And that sentence means, I've done it. You could almost say that sentence means, I've paid. I've paid the price. He's done everything that's necessary so that we can be forgiven and become God's friends. Because let's be very clear about it, please. The Christian faith says, the Bible says, that through Jesus, through what Jesus did on the cross, we can all have a relationship with God. We can become God's friends. So that we know him. So that we're forgiven now and forever. That's the second thing about Jesus. He came to rescue us. He came to reveal God to us. He came to rescue us. And the third thing to say about Jesus is this: he demands a response from us. That's here in these sentences here that John Bryant chose. It's about how we respond to Jesus, to who he is and to what he's done. Listen to this. Jesus came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. So there were people who said no to Jesus. That's why they crucified him. There were people who turned their backs on Jesus. They didn't want anything to do with him. They rejected him. And there are people like that today as well. But there are some people who say yes to Jesus. Listen to this. It goes on. Yet to all who did receive Jesus, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Here it is. This says everyone who says yes to Jesus, everyone who receives Jesus, who trusts in what Jesus did on the cross, that person becomes a child of God, which means they can start calling God Father or Dad, as John Bryant put it earlier. Not everyone can do that, because naturally we're not forgiven. But if we receive this forgiveness that Jesus is offering through what he did on the cross, then wow, we have a friendship with God. We've been accepted by God, and we can call him Father or Dad. It's an astonishing thing. So many people think the Christian faith is about people trying to do their best in order to get to God. That's not what the Christian faith is. That would be impossible. We could never be good enough. No, the Christian faith is God has done everything for us. He came down into this world and he died on the cross so that we could be forgiven. So we can be forgiven not because of what we do for God. We can be forgiven because of what God did for us when Jesus died on the cross. And I want to say that is great news. But we need to respond. We need to decide whether we're going to say yes or no. A young guy and a girl get to know one another and they really get on very well and they go out for meals and they go to the cinema and stuff like that. And one evening after a few months they're down in Mayflower Park and they're hand in hand and they're looking at the view and they're just enjoying being together. And the guy turns to the girl and he says to her, and you can imagine the violins playing in the background, I love you. Now the girl has a choice. She can say, well, this has all been a very embarrassing mistake. I never want to see you ever again. Or she can look at the guy and say, I love you too. But one thing no girl will ever say when a guy says, I love you, is, that's really interesting. When Jesus died on the cross, God was saying to us, I love you. I love you. I love you so much that Jesus, my son, came into the world to show you what I'm like. I love you so much that Jesus went to the cross and he has taken the punishment for your darkness, for your bad stuff. I love you. And sooner or later we need to make a decision about whether we're going to say yes or we're going to say no. Now, it may be that you're nowhere near that. You're not in a position to make that decision yet because you've got lots of questions. Lots of questions you want to ask. You want to ask John Bryant. You want to ask someone else. There's questions which we have as thinking people. It's quite natural and it's healthy. Thank you for being here tonight. I want to encourage you to keep asking your questions. I also want to invite you to something. We're offering a 5-evening thing called Jesus the Game Changer. There are cards like this on your tables, and there are also cards out in the lounge there. And Jesus the Game Changer is something that's going to happen on Thursday evenings, starting on the 2nd of November. And it's especially designed for people who are not convinced about Jesus and Christianity, but they've got questions. They want to find out. They want to know if there's evidence. They want to know if you really can believe this stuff without switching your brain off. And I want to say you absolutely can believe it without switching your brain off. And here's an example. So this course is called Jesus the Game Changer. And every evening, it's 5 evenings, every Thursday from the 2nd of November. Every evening there'll be a short video which everyone can watch. And then there's opportunity. Oh, there's some food first. Then you watch the video. And then there's the opportunity to ask questions, make comments, say, I didn't agree with that. What about that? Why did he say that? What did that mean? Just to talk. It's a great opportunity. There's even a sign-up sheet out there if you want to say you'll come to this, or maybe you just want to take the card home and think about it, and then let us know if you want to come. Jesus the Game Changer, worth coming to. But maybe you're sitting here and you're thinking, actually, I do believe this stuff. I do believe it's true. I believe those things about Jesus that we've just read in the 4th Gospel, the Gospel of John. I believe Jesus reveals God to us. I believe Jesus came to rescue us when he died on the cross. And I believe he demands a response. And I'm saying yes. And if that's you, what I want to do in a moment is just say a short prayer. It'll be very short. And if this is not for you, if you're not convinced at all, and you've no intention of praying that prayer, that's absolutely fine. I don't want to push you into praying a prayer. That would be horrific. Just let it flow past you. But if you are in the position of saying, actually, I believe this stuff. I believe there is darkness in me, and I believe that Jesus can forgive me because of what he did on the cross. I want to pray this prayer. Then please, in your mind, pray the prayer when I pray it. Let me just say it before I pray this prayer. There are 3 bits to this prayer. Sorry, thank you, please. Sorry is saying sorry to God for the bad stuff in our lives, which sometimes we've done quite deliberately. Thank you is saying thank you to God that Jesus came and died on the cross and took the punishment for our bad stuff. And please is asking Jesus to come into our lives by his Holy Spirit and to live in us and to forgive us and to make us into Christians. Sorry, thank you, please. If that's a prayer you'd like to pray, then pray along in your mind as I pray this now. Let's just pray briefly, please. Father, I'm sorry for the bad stuff. I'm sorry for the things I've done that are deliberately wrong. I'm sorry for the people I've hurt. I'm sorry for the times I've deliberately done stuff against my conscience. I'm sorry. And I'm sorry that I've sometimes lived as if you're not there at all. Thank you for Jesus. Thank you that Jesus came to reveal God to us. And thank you that Jesus came to rescue us. Thank you that he was willing to go to the cross. Thank you for his astonishing love. Thank you that he took my punishment. Thank you that he took the blame for my sin. I thank you. Now, please, Lord Jesus, come into my life by your Holy Spirit. Come in to rescue me and to forgive me. Come in to make me a real Christian. Come in to live inside me so that I will know God as my Father. Come in so that I will know that my life has meaning and direction. And please change my life so that I become more and more the person you designed me to be. And I pray all these things in the great and strong name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you for listening. Can I just say, if you've prayed that prayer, or you're close to praying that prayer, just wondering about it, you didn't pray it, why not come up to me afterwards? I'll be milling around here with everyone else, and ask me for one of these booklets. I'd love to give you a booklet. It's called Why Jesus, and it's especially, it will repeat some of the things I've said, and there's also a prayer at the end that you can pray if you decide you want to. It's a great thing to have if you're thinking seriously about this, or if you've just prayed this prayer. So do come and ask me for a Why Jesus. Do take the opportunity to talk to John Bryant about anything he said in the interview or anything he hasn't said in the interview. Don't forget Game Changer. And don't forget tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening is our last Real Lives evening. And our guest who's going to be interviewed is Manoj Raitata. And the theme is Riches to Redemption. I haven't heard the whole story, but it's quite a story from what I hear. It's going to be worth coming to. Let's give a round of applause to Tom and Leela, who are about to come and play some more music for us. Let's give another round of applause to say thank you to John Bryant for coming this way to share with us. Thank you very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of the evening.